The sun scorched the wide, dusty fields of the Mallister Ranch. Every plank of the fence, every dry tuft of grass seemed to shimmer under the relentless heat. And yet Mary Ellison didn't notice. Her wrists were raw, the coarse ropes biting into her skin, her body pressed uncomfortably against the splintered wood. 17 years old, motherless, alone, her childhood had been stolen piece by piece, leaving only the sharp-edged reality of survival. Her stepfather, Clay Whitman, had transformed the ranch from a home into a prison. Each word he spat was another lash on her spirit. "You're worthless. Without me, you're nothing." His cruelty was methodical, fueled by years of greed and a sense of entitlement he claimed was his birthright. Mary had tried to resist, to fight with every ounce of courage she could summon, but each attempt only brought more pain. Now she hung there, the ropes biting into her wrists, her back pressed painfully against the fence, sweat and tears mixing on her dirt-streaked face. The sun's heat was relentless, but it was nothing compared to the weight of fear pressing down on her chest. Mary closed her eyes and remembered the smile of her mother, the way the ranch had once smelled of hay and fresh bread. That memory was her last tether to a life that had vanished. When the ropes had cut her skin and left angry welts along her arms, it wasn't just flesh that burned. It was hope itself, searing into memory. Her voice rose in a raw, broken plea. "Help! Someone!" It cracked like a brittle branch underfoot, yet she called out anyway, clinging to the faintest possibility that the world still held mercy. Then came the faintest sound over the dry wind, a rhythm different from the creak of the fence, the groan of the barn door. Hooves. The sound was subtle at first, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight Mary hadn't dared imagine. Hope. John Tanner was riding along the edge of the Mallister property, making his usual round to check the fences. The dry wind whipped against his weathered face, carrying dust and the distant scent of hay. Something tugged at his instincts, a faint, desperate cry. He paused, turning his horse toward the sound, eyes narrowing under the brim of his hat. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice filled with terror and despair, the kind that demanded attention. And then he saw her, Mary, young, battered, and tied to the fence like a captive of fate. Her hair clung to her dirt-streaked face, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and the faintest flicker of hope. Her lips quivered as she tried to call out again. John's hand rested on the leather of his saddle as he nudged his horse forward cautiously. He had fought men in saloons, tracked outlaws across prairies, and buried friends lost to fire and gunpowder. But nothing had prepared him for this, the pure, unfiltered evil in a man who preyed on his own family. Mary's body shook as she tried to hold herself upright, and for a heartbeat, John saw not just a frightened girl, but the shadow of the woman she would become, strong, resilient, unbroken. He slid off his horse, boots crunching against the dry dirt, and moved carefully toward her. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low, steady, like a rope thrown to a drowning soul. "I've got you." Mary's shoulders trembled violently. Relief battled with fear, her body unsure if it could trust someone after all the years of betrayal. John knelt, drawing a small knife from his belt. The blade caught the harsh sunlight as he began cutting the ropes that bound her. Each fiber snapped with a sharp, final sound, echoing like a promise breaking the chains of her past. As the last rope fell away, John's hand steadied her. She leaned against him, trembling, but alive. The first spark of hope had finally been kindled. He wants the ranch," she whispered, voice breaking. He won't stop." John's jaw tightened. Greed and cruelty had a long shadow in the West, and he had seen men become monsters when driven by either. But Clay Whitman's depravity had no bounds. "Listen to me," he said, voice low but commanding. "You're not alone anymore. That ranch, it's yours, and he's got no right to take it." Mary's tears spilled freely, not just from fear, but from hearing words she had longed for, words that finally affirmed her existence. She wanted to believe him, but the shadow of Clay's violence lingered like smoke. John helped her onto his horse, keeping his arm firm around her as they began the slow ride toward the safety of the ranch house. The wind carried the dust past them, the creaking of leather and pounding hooves the only sounds in the vast, oppressive silence. Mary leaned back slightly, trusting the man who had already done more for her than anyone had in years. As they approached the house, the sun dipped low, turning the horizon into shades of amber and blood. John set her down gently inside, fetched water, and cleaned the cuts on her arms. His hands were rough, but careful, almost fatherly in their touch. Mary watched, wondering why this stranger showed more concern than the man who was supposed to protect her. The night settled over the ranch like a heavy quilt. Mary sat wrapped in a blanket near the fire, but sleep did not come. Her mind was a whirl of fear and uncertainty. Outside, the wind whispered through the wooden beams, a reminder that Clay Whitman was still out there, still a threat. And then, as if on cue, the silence broke. Boots scraped against the gravel, the familiar creak of the ranch gate announcing his return. Mary froze, her breath caught in her chest. John's hand moved to his pistol, eyes scanning the shadows. "You can't hide her from me," a voice roared through the night. "That ranch is mine, and everything on it belongs to me." Mary's body stiffened, but this time she did not cower. Something inside, her, strength born of years of suffering, rose up. "You're lying," she shouted, voice trembling but fierce. "Mama left it to me. You'll never take it. Not again." Clay burst through the door, red-faced, fists clenched, fueled by rage and greed. He lunged at Mary, but John was ready. His frame blocked the attack like a wall of oak. The two men clashed, fists meeting flesh, boots scraping against the wooden floor, tables tipping, lanterns swinging wildly. Shadows danced across the walls, mirroring the chaos of the struggle. Mary pressed herself against the corner, heart pounding. Every punch, every dodge was not just about survival, it was about justice. John's years of experience were evident in his movements, but more than that, he fought for something Clay never understood. Honor. Finally, with one final maneuver, John forced Clay down, pinning him to the floor. The pistol clattered away, and the fight became a battle of wills. John's voice cut low and sharp. "Your time's up. You're finished here." Mary stepped forward, trembling yet unwavering. "You will answer for what you've done," she said. "Not to me, not to him, to the law." Clay's eyes flickered with fear. For all his cruelty, he understood one truth. In the West, no man outruns justice forever. The dawn broke slowly over the ranch, bathing the land in golden light. Clay Whitman was gone, taken by the county lawmen, weighed down by evidence and the testimony of neighbors. For the first time in years, Mary felt a strange new weight lift from her chest. She was no longer trapped. Her fear dissipated, leaving behind a spark of hope. John remained, helping her mend fences, tending fields, and restoring the ranch to life. Mary's hands, once weak and trembling, grew steady. Her confidence returned, slowly, like a sapling breaking through dry earth. And through it all, a quiet bond formed between her and John. A trust born not from romance, but from shared struggle and protection. By nightfall, Mary would sit by the window, watching stars emerge, the wind carrying the scent of freedom. She held on to hope, fragile but real. The ranch, the home her mother had loved, was safe again. And for the first time, Mary believed in the possibility of peace. If you're captivated by Mary's fight and want to see how she and John protect the ranch from further threats, hit the subscribe button now and don't miss the next part of this story. Grab a cup of tea, settle in, and imagine, what would you do if faced with a man like Clay Whitman? The morning sun cut through the horizon in streaks of amber and gold, painting the Mallister Ranch in stark contrasts of light and shadow. Mary Ellison rose before the rooster's call, her muscles sore but steady. The night's events had left a mark deeper than the bruises she could see. Even though Clay Whitman was in custody, the fear he had planted still clung to the corners of her mind. John Tanner moved quietly around the barn, tending the horses, his face set in concentration. Mary watched from the edge of the corral, adjusting a loose strap on her saddle. Their silence was comfortable, a shared understanding that words were sometimes heavier than deeds. Yet beneath the quiet, tension simmered. The ranch had been freed from immediate danger, but the scars of the past weren't so easily erased. Mary approached the stables, her hands brushing the rough wood. "The West doesn't forgive easily, does it?" she said softly, almost to herself. John glanced over his shoulder. "It doesn't," he replied, voice low. "But it teaches you to stand." She nodded, remembering the way he had stepped between her and Clay. How his presence had been more than protection. It had been a promise, and promises in these parts were rare. The first task of the day was to repair the northern fence, where a storm had torn through months ago. Mary lifted the wooden planks, her hands raw, and set them against the rail. She could feel John's eyes on her, not with scrutiny, but with a quiet pride she wasn't used to. For years, no one had looked at her like she mattered. As they worked side by side, the wind shifted, carrying a scent Mary knew all too well: smoke. Her stomach clenched, and she froze, listening. John stiffened beside her, his hand hovering over his gun. "Didn't think the law would be fast enough," Mary whispered. Her voice trembled, though this time it was more alert than afraid. "Fast enough or not, some men are slower to die than the law expects," John said, his eyes scanning the hills. Before Mary could respond, a rider appeared on the crest of a nearby hill. Dust trailed behind him, and his approach was deliberate. He wore a wide-brimmed hat tilted low, but she recognized the gait, the slight limp in his left leg. Her heart lurched. "Clay?" she asked, disbelief mingling with terror. John didn't answer, already moving forward, boots crunching on gravel. "No," he muttered. "Someone else. Someone worse." The rider came closer, and as the distance closed, his face became visible, a man with sharp eyes and a cruel smile. Sheriff Dalton. He had been Clay Whitman's ally in the county, a man whose badge had been more of a threat than a protection. Dalton had a reputation for bending justice, and Mary felt her stomach turn. "Morning, Miss Ellison," Dalton said smoothly, tipping his hat. "Quite the commotion last night. Trouble follows you, doesn't it?" Mary stepped back instinctively. "You can't." John's hand rested on her shoulder. "She doesn't owe you anything," he said, tone as solid as the barn beams around them. Dalton chuckled, though it carried no humor. "I don't think of it as owing, Mr. Tanner. More like settling old accounts." The tension was thick, tangible, pressing down on them like the desert heat. Mary gripped the rail, trying to steady herself, but every instinct screamed, danger. Dalton's presence wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder that the past could always reach forward, no matter how far she ran. John stepped in front of Mary. "You're leaving, Dalton. Now." Dalton smirked, hand resting lightly on his pistol. "I think you misunderstand. I'm not here for conversation. I'm here for business, that ranch, that land, and Miss Ellison." Mary's stomach dropped. He wanted her, or at least what she represented: control, inheritance, the last tether to a family that had been torn apart. John's voice was low and dangerous. Not a step closer. Dalton's smirk faded, replaced by the cold calculation of a predator. He moved his hand slightly toward his weapon, but John was faster. The first shot rang out, a sharp crack echoing across the ranch. Dalton ducked behind the horse he rode, bullets kicking up dust around them. Mary's heart pounded, adrenaline surging. She ducked behind a water trough, gripping the edge with trembling fingers. "John," she whispered. He won't touch you while I'm standing," John interrupted, his voice firm. Every move he made was precise, defensive, protective. Years of survival in the West had honed his instincts to razor sharpness. The gunfight was brief, chaotic, and deafening. Dust rose in heavy clouds, obscuring vision. Dalton fired again, then retreated behind the hill's natural ridge. John used the cover of the barn and stacked hay bales to close the distance, keeping Mary safe as he maneuvered. Finally, Dalton was forced to retreat, realizing that brute force alone wouldn't win this fight. He spat into the dirt, glaring back with a promise: "This isn't over." Mary slumped against the fence, knees shaking. Her hands were raw from hauling planks, holding the reins, and bracing during the firefight. Yet, for the first time, she felt something she hadn't dared in years: a flicker of agency. She could survive. She could fight. and for the first time, she believed she might have allies who wouldn't abandon her. John came back, boots kicking up dust, face tense but controlled. He held out his hand. "Come on," he said. "We're not safe yet." Mary grasped it, feeling strength she hadn't known she possessed. Together, they moved toward the cabin, the western sun turning their shadows long across the land. Inside, John secured the doors and windows, checking each latch with meticulous care. Mary watched him, thinking about the man she had just met. He wasn't a savior from a storybook. He was real, flawed, tired. But he was on her side, and that mattered more than she could say. As the evening fell, the ranch settled into an uneasy calm. Mary tended the animals, feeding horses and checking fences, but her mind constantly returned to the day's events. Dalton's threat lingered, a shadow over the land. She realized that while Clay had been dangerous, Dalton represented a different kind of menace, calculated, patient, and relentless. By night, the wind carried the scent of smoke again, this time faint but unmistakable. Mary's pulse quickened. "John," she said softly. He didn't need her to finish. He had heard that scent before. "Dalton," he muttered, jaw tightening. "He's testing us, seeing how far he can push." Mary swallowed, heart heavy. Fear and anger mixed into a potent cocktail. She was tired of being hunted, tired of hiding, tired of feeling powerless. John knelt beside her, placing a hand over hers. "You've survived worse," he said. "You've endured chains, fear, and cruelty. This is just another fight. And this time, we're ready." Mary looked into his eyes, seeing the determination mirrored there. She realized something vital. The ranch, the home her mother had cherished, was more than land. It was a symbol of survival, of family, of the life she refused to surrender. The night deepened, bringing with it stars that shimmered coldly over the ranch. Somewhere in the darkness, Dalton lingered, plotting his next move. But Mary was no longer the girl tied to the fence, helpless and silent. She was ready to fight, ready to reclaim her home. If you want to see how Mary and John defend the ranch from Dalton's relentless schemes, hit the subscribe button and stay with us. And comment below, if you were in Mary's place, what would you do to protect your home? The sun rose slowly over the Mallister Ranch, spilling gold across the fields and casting long shadows from the barn and fences. The air was crisp, but it carried a tension heavier than the morning chill. Mary Ellison moved among the animals, her hands steady, her mind alert. Something in the wind told her Dalton wouldn't rest. The sheriff had promised to return, and he always kept his promises, no matter how cruel. John Tanner rode to the fence line, inspecting repairs from yesterday's firefight. His jaw was set, eyes scanning the horizon. "He's coming," he muttered, more to himself than to Mary. "And this time, he'll bring everything he can." Mary wiped her hands on her apron and faced him. "Then we'll be ready," she said. There was no tremor in her voice now, only a firm resolve. The girl who had once been tied to a fence and left to suffer was gone. In her place stood a young woman tempered by hardship, her mind sharp, her courage unwavering. By midday, the dust on the horizon revealed movement. 3 riders, approaching fast. Dalton led the group, his hat low, eyes cold and calculating. Beside him were 2 men, hardened men with guns at their hips, likely loyal to his every command. The threat was unmistakable. John leaned down to Mary. "Stay behind me. Keep low. Don't make a sound." She nodded, heart hammering, but fear no longer dominated her. She had survived cruelty, chains, and despair. Bullets would not break her now. The riders reached the corral, and Dalton dismounted with a swagger that mocked civility. "Morning, Miss Ellison," he drawled. "Thought you'd have left by now." Mary stepped forward, unafraid. "This is my home, and I'm not leaving." Dalton's eyes narrowed. Bold words for a girl who barely survived last night. John's hand rested on his pistol, but he did not draw. He knew Dalton's recklessness. The sheriff thrived on underestimating his opponents. Without warning, Dalton's men spread out, circling the barn and the corral, trying to trap them. Bullets kicked up dust, bouncing off wooden boards. John moved swiftly, positioning Mary behind a stack of hay bales, and returned fire when necessary. Each shot measured, precise. Mary's pulse raced as she clutched a spare rifle John had given her. She had never fired a gun in anger before, but necessity left no room for hesitation. Dalton's men advanced, careless of cover. Mary's first shot rang out, surprising even her, and one of them crumpled to the ground. Her hands shook, but she didn't lower the rifle. This was survival, and she had learned its cost. Dalton's expression darkened. "Girl, you've got fire in you. I'll admit that. But fire doesn't save fools from justice." He raised his gun, aiming for John, but Mary reacted instinctively. A shot rang out from the loft above, grazing Dalton's shoulder. He stumbled back, cursed, and retreated behind the barn. John took the opportunity to flank the remaining men, disarming them one by one, until only Dalton remained. The sheriff's limp was noticeable now, a result of his own recklessness and the small but precise attacks Mary had managed. He spat, blood on his lips, and glared at them. "You think this ends here?" Mary stepped out from her cover, eyes blazing. "It ends the moment you leave, Dalton. You're done here." Dalton laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Done? I haven't even started." He lunged, but John met him with the calm fury of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Their fists collided, boots sliding on loose dirt. Mary watched, tense, her hands gripping the rifle, ready to intervene if necessary. But this fight was John's. He was the shield, and she trusted him. The struggle was brutal. Dalton was strong, fueled by rage and desperation, but John's experience and patience outweighed brute force. With a final, measured strike, John forced Dalton to the ground. The sheriff gasped, defeated, his authority and menace reduced to the dirt beneath him. Mary approached, the rifle lowered, but her gaze fixed firmly on Dalton. "You'll answer for what you did," she said. Her voice was unwavering. "Not just for me, but for every life you tried to ruin." Dalton glared, but the words carried weight. Outlaws and corrupt sheriffs could only hide behind fear for so long. The lawmen who had heard of his cruelty and Clay Whitman's arrest arrived soon after, tipped off by neighbors who had witnessed the previous night's chaos. Dalton was taken into custody, his smirk replaced with the grim acceptance of defeat. Mary sank to her knees, exhaustion finally catching up to her. John knelt beside her, a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. She looked up at him, tears slipping down her dust-streaked cheeks. "It's really over?" "Yes," he said. "And you?" He gestured around at the ranch, the fences, the animals. "You've kept it. You fought, and you survived. That makes you stronger than anyone who ever tried to take it." The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the Mallister Ranch. Mary stood, brushing dirt from her skirts, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers and rain, a reminder that even after the harshest storm, life found a way to bloom. Over the following weeks, Mary and John worked tirelessly to restore the ranch. The fences were mended, the fields plowed, and the animals tended with care. Every plank nailed, every seed sown, every repair made was a testament to resilience. Mary's hands bore new scars, but each one symbolized strength and determination rather than pain. Their bond deepened, not through words, but through action, shared labor, shared vigilance, and the quiet understanding that came from facing danger side by side. They laughed softly in rare moments of relief, and even in silence, they felt the connection of shared trials. Mary began to reclaim her confidence. She rode the ranch herself, her posture firm, her hands steady on the reins. She learned to shoot accurately, her aim improving daily under John's careful instruction. More importantly, she learned to trust in herself, to act without hesitation when danger arose. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Mary and John stood atop a hill overlooking the ranch. The air was still, save for the rustle of grass in the evening breeze. "I never thought I'd see this place safe again," Mary said quietly, her voice almost lost to the wind. John glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Safe isn't permanent in the West, but we'll make it ours while we can." She smiled, small but genuine. "And we will." The season turned, bringing warmer days and cooler nights. The Mallister Ranch thrived under Mary's hands. Her confidence mirrored in the healthy crops and contented animals. Neighbors who had doubted her resilience now looked on with respect. She was no longer a frightened girl. She was a leader, capable and unyielding. John remained close, but he never imposed. Their connection deepened naturally, like the roots of an old oak, steady and strong. When Mary laughed, it was unguarded. When she rode across the fields, her hair whipping in the wind, she felt the freedom she had long been denied. One night, as they sat on the porch with a warm fire flickering nearby, Mary turned to John. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, "for standing with me, for everything." John shrugged, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "You earned it. And besides," he said, looking out at the dark horizon, "some things are worth fighting for. Some people are worth protecting." Mary leaned back, her eyes on the stars, and for the first time in years, felt truly safe. The past still lingered in memories and scars, but it no longer controlled her. She had reclaimed her home, her dignity, and her future. If Mary's journey inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe to follow more stories of courage in the Wild West. Tell us in the comments, if you were in Mary's place, how would you defend what's yours? The weeks that followed were quiet, almost peaceful. Dalton's arrest ensured that the Mallister Ranch was safe, for now. Mary continued to grow, learning not just to survive, but to thrive. The land responded to her care, flourishing under her attention, just as she flourished under John's quiet support. And while love between them was unspoken most days, it grew in small gestures. A shared smile across a hayfield, a hand offered when lifting a stubborn beam, a quiet understanding in the middle of a stormy night. Love, like the ranch, needed tending, patience, and courage. One crisp morning, as Mary rode the perimeter of the fields, she paused at the fence where she had once been bound. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, remembering the fear, the despair, the pain. But now, the sun illuminated the land she had fought for, the ranch she had preserved, and the life she had reclaimed. She tightened her grip on the reins and whispered to the wind, "I'm no longer afraid. I'm home." John rode beside her, matching her pace, and together they faced the endless fields, the promise of tomorrow stretching before them. The Mallister Ranch was theirs, not because it was unchallenged, but because they had survived, endured, and risen stronger than ever. And somewhere in that quiet expanse of the West, the past faded like the last rays of sunset, leaving only hope, resilience, and the unspoken bond of two souls who had found each other in the harshest of lands. If you stayed with Mary and John to the end, tap like, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe for more gripping Wild West stories. And remember, even in the hardest battles, courage, hope, and resilience can make a home of any place, no matter how harsh.